Gail Davis was in her bedroom watching the news when the storms came through Friday afternoon.
And I looked and I seen all this debris mixing, and I said, oh, we really in it.
She saw the tornado come down her street and ran to the basement.
Everything was like just popping glass, and I was so scared.
The tornado opened up the roof over the very bedroom she was just sitting in.
One very scary story from that huge, deadly tornado that struck the beautiful city of St. Louis on Friday. 7 people died in Missouri during Friday's severe weather. The mayor of St. Louis says the damage is estimated at more than $1.6 billion in her city. I'm sorry to say the city of St. Louis is bracing for more storms tonight. These new storms are expected to be less severe, but a lot of rain and high winds is going to be dangerous in a city that is littered with loose debris like you see here. St. Louis's mayor told MSNBC today that her city is definitely going to need federal help, including from FEMA, from the Federal Emergency Management Agency. FEMA has told St. Louis that they'll have people from the agency, they'll have assessors on the ground in a couple of days, by Wednesday. Hopefully that means St. Louis will start getting some of the federal help it so obviously needs. But what's looming over this is, of course, that FEMA may not be at their best right now. Earlier this month, the acting head of FEMA was fired and then immediately escorted out of the agency's headquarters for daring to say that the agency he was tasked with running should exist. He was asked at a congressional hearing about Trump's desire to abolish FEMA. He said he didn't think that was a good idea, and so they fired him immediately and frog marched him out. The replacement head of FEMA has no background in emergency management at all. He greeted his new staff by telling them he will, quote, run right over anyone who resists him at the agency. He also told them to expect firings, expect layoffs. FEMA employees tell the Wall Street Journal the agency is months behind schedule in preparing for hurricane season, which starts less than 2 weeks from now. And it's not just the agency that responds to severe weather that's under strain right now. It's also the agency that tells us what the weather is, that predicts and tracks and warns us about severe weather. As tornadoes struck Missouri on Friday, very, very severe storms also battered Kentucky. One tornado in southeastern Kentucky killed 19 people. The government agency that provides weather data for every weather station and every weather app and monitors storms and sends out emergency alerts for all kinds of severe weather is the National Weather Service. And the National Weather Service in Kentucky has 3 offices. None of them is fully staffed because of Trump's cuts to the National Weather Service. The office that handles forecasts for eastern Kentucky, where Friday's tornado struck, it's short 7 staff members, which means that, among other things, the office no longer has an overnight staff at all. Because, again, obviously, we would hope that severe weather has the decency to only strike during business hours. At any of the 3 offices in Kentucky, there is no meteorologist in charge now. Now, to be clear, we don't know if those staffing shortages in Kentucky had any effect on the ability of the Weather Service to manage and predict and send out appropriate alerts about Friday's storms. There's no reason to think that the Weather Service was anyway at fault for what happened in terms of the devastating impact of those storms. The agency says the Jackson office was staffed overnight for that one night on Friday because of the expected severe weather. Officials, including Kentucky's Democratic governor, say they've seen no evidence that the Weather Service performance was impaired in this instance. But even if it wasn't in this instance, these kinds of cuts just systematically reduce our ability to cope with something as inescapable and inevitable as severe weather. And did I mention that hurricane season starts in 2 weeks? Joining us now is one of the meteorologists the National Weather Service has just lost in recent months. Until less than 3 weeks ago, Brian Lamar served as the meteorologist in charge of the Tampa Bay Area Weather Forecast Office in Florida. But as the Trump administration slashed staff at the Weather Service, Mr. Lamar accepted an early retirement at the end of last month. Mr. Lamar, thank you very much for being here. I really appreciate you making the time.
Hey, thank you, Rachel. I really appreciate all the highlight and spotlight you placed on the stories before the lead-in. And the National Weather Service, as you know, and all the viewing audience knows, we're a public safety agency. And especially as we go into severe weather season, which we're in now, hurricane season coming up in 2 weeks, as you mentioned, it's so important to really understand more about the National Weather Service and make sure it has the support that it really needs moving into the future.
I feel like, I can't speak for everybody, but I don't know anybody in this country who doesn't have respect and admiration for the National Weather Service and their staff and the service that they provide and the sort of creativity and diligence with which they have worked to always be at the cutting edge of what they do, to constantly be improving not only their science, but also the way they communicate to the public about what's going on. I just don't know anybody who has a beef with the Weather Service at all. That is making it very hard for me as a sort of political observer to understand what percentage there is for anybody in the attacks on the Weather Service and the gutting of the National Weather Service staff that we have seen from this administration. When this administration took over, did you foresee that it would mean large-scale cuts to the agency?
No, I don't think it was a surprise, to us. I think there's a plan out there, a 2025 plan that kind of outlines certain cuts that were going to be proposed and enacted, and I think we're still working through that. But I think it's also important to really put things into perspective. When I first started with the National Weather Service over 31 years ago, we were an agency that had about anywhere between 5,000 and 6,000 people. And we had over 250 offices across the country. But over the years, we actually saw a downward trend in the staffing of the National Weather Service over the past, I'd say, 20 years. And we had over 250 offices, field offices across the country when I first started in the early 90s. And we had a modernization and restructuring going on right when I joined the National Weather Service. It was a very exciting time. And we actually had tremendous support from Congress in terms of additional funding, a significant investment from the American people into the National Weather Service. We saw Doppler radars that were fielded across the country. We saw new science and technology, and we hired a lot of people in the National Weather Service, but we actually consolidated from over 250 offices to about our current 122 offices that we have in place right now. And the men and women that serve in the National Weather Service, I can't think of a more dedicated group. I really liken the group of people, their dedication, say like law enforcement, firefighters, the medical community. It is a 24/7, 365-day job. And it's a passion because as public servants, the National Weather Service employees, and throughout my career, like I said, over 30 years, it's really been about how can we help other people make decisions when severe weather strikes.
What are you most worried about, Brian, in terms of the cuts? We've got offices that don't have staffing overnight. We've got multiple offices that have no meteorologist in charge. We've got mass firings of probationary workers, young hires in their first, in many cases, first year or two on the job. What do you think the public should be aware of in terms of what's most dangerous in those changes?
I think you mentioned a couple of them right there, Rachel, in terms of the terminations of the probationary employees, because that's your lifeblood. That's the future of the agency. That's the new generation. Those are the wonderful, young, innovative minds that are coming out of college. They're also wanting to come into the National Weather Service from broadcast media, from the military, from private sector. And that's really the future of the agency. So I think that's one significant impact right there, because there was so much innovation and talent that was actually helping this agency modernize and go through what we call a transformation in the National Weather Service. But I think what worries me most is really the hiring freeze and the lack of significant investment that we're looking at in the National Weather Service. So I would think for everyone listening tonight, it's really about focusing more on additional resources needed for the National Weather Service. Like I said, over 30 years ago, we were going through a modernization restructuring. We actually downsized the number of offices, but we increased our technology. We added more meteorologists and hydrologists, electronics technicians, admin support. It takes everyone. It's not just about the meteorology. It's about the entire scientific spectrum. And you may have heard of the phrase an integrated warning team. That's what the National Weather Service has a foundation with. And that's really going to be the National Weather Service, our core partners in emergency management, and also the media. The three groups work together to help people protect themselves. And as we saw over the past 3 days, killer tornado outbreaks across significant portions of the country. You mentioned earlier there's severe weather going on as we speak. And as we approach the hurricane season, we really have to make sure that everyone is prepared. And if we start seeing additional cuts, then that's really going to be starting to chip away at that preparedness across the country.
Brian Lamar, former meteorologist in charge of the National Weather Service Forecast Office in Tampa Bay, Florida. Thank you for your years of government service. Thanks for helping us understand this tonight, Brian. I appreciate it.
All right. Thank you, Rachel. Thank you.
All right. More news ahead here tonight. Stay with us.
Each week, veteran lawyers Andrew Weissman and Mary McCord break down the latest developments inside the Trump administration's Department of Justice.
The administration doesn't necessarily want to be questioned on any of its policy.
Maine Justice. New episodes drop every Tuesday.
Okay, on Friday night, you might have seen the Washington Post publish this headline. Trump Justice Department considers removing key check on lawmaker prosecutions. The Post reporting on a proposal inside the Justice Department to make it so federal prosecutors across the country could indict sitting members of Congress without getting approval from lawyers in Maine Justice's public integrity section. So any random U.S. attorney anywhere in the country could indict a sitting member of Congress on their own say-so without even needing to run it by anyone in Washington. That story broke on Friday, and it's obviously a big deal, right? One of the reasons the public integrity section exists at DOJ is to prevent prosecutors from bringing politically motivated charges. With this change,